Hi. It hasn't been just us in a little bit.
I don't even know how to feel. It's like, it's like when you're used to having the kids around. That's the way I feel like with our guests, Like we just have to focus on the guest. And yeah, we're back. We're back here, Twig. How are you feeling?
I'm exhausted, man.
Yeah, same.
I gotta say, I have not worked like this in a decade since I left the White House or whenever. I'm exhausted.
Tell people what you've been up to, Carri Twigg. First off, welcome to the Twigg and Jenkins podcast. There are how many days left?
6.
There are 6 days left. Twig and I, we started with Zooms. We are now traveling the country together. Carri is now embedded into a campaign apparatus in Philly. But we're back in D.C. There was an incredible night we had last night. But you've not told the viewers, what you're up to.
Yeah. Well, so we're in D.C. because we went to Kamala's closing argument, big speech in D.C. last night. And I was up late after that. So, but yeah, about a month ago, I just packed up my little life and moved to Philly. Not moved, but packed some suitcases and decamped to Philly to help out and volunteer on the campaign. Someone we worked with at the White House, Paulette Aniskoff, came in and was a senior advisor for the entire Pennsylvania operation,
Legend.
which she had
We
done
love
for Obama, I think in 08 and 12, maybe.
Yeah.
And so a bunch of former Obama alumni and just other people were going to work and just volunteer and be late help and support for the team there that had been in Pennsylvania grinding it out all cycle. And now that Ohio is not a battleground state, I would have just gone home to Ohio, but it's just not significant. In 12, I left Chicago and was in Ohio for the last 3 weeks. But yeah, so I'm in Philly. I'm helping on the digital team and the surrogates team. We're running a bunch of camera crews around and making content and ads. I'm,
Twig is
helping with the labor. I'm
playing
helping.
Basketball with Don Cheadle.
I did play some basketball with Don Cheadle. He had a lot of tips for my form. I haven't played basketball since I think I was on the 9th grade basketball team. It's not my sport.
Yeah. Do we think Don Cheadle, was he good?
He had a good jumper.
Really? I don't know why. I just don't think I just picture him as a Juilliard actor,
Sure.
But doesn't actually know how to dribble a basketball.
Not true. He's very athletic.
Okay. All right,
War Machine is very athletic.
War Machine can dribble. Okay.
Yeah, he can absolutely dribble. I think he would take great umbrage with
all
that
right,
assumption.
Don. I'm sorry.
Listen, he can't dunk.
Yeah, he's a short guy.
Yeah,
He's a little guy.
But he can definitely dribble. Yeah, he's got ball handling skills. But yeah, so it's been great. Pennsylvania is sort of the battleground state of the moment. Everything else is sort of icing or alternative routes, but it's almost impossible to win this thing if you don't win Pennsylvania.
It's just it. Whoever wins Pennsylvania, I think, will win the election.
Right.
It's just it.
And it is quite similar to Ohio in many respects, and so there are political dynamics there that feel very familiar to me. I think if I'd been dropped into Nevada or something, I would be much more out of my depth. But Pennsylvania is a lot easier for me to sort of take a swing at. And
Pennsylvania is like the new Ohio.
It is. It is the new Ohio.
Yeah.
It's wild.
Yeah.
And yeah, but that said, it's I haven't worked 18-hour days. I'm just you want me back here again tomorrow?
Carri's been texting, or we've been talking in between, and you're at the office till midnight. You're at the office till 2 a.m. Whereas I am doom scrolling until 2 a.m. So, we are expending our energy on this campaign in many different ways. And that's not true. I've been traveling. I've been on the road.
Yeah.
Not officially on the campaign, but helping out in a variety of different ways, different voter events, different get out the vote programs. We're also in Alabama with Eric Holder earlier this week with Shamari Figures. Guys, we can maybe take back the House. It's a possibility.
It's totally a possibility.
And thanks to Eric Holder and Marina Jenkins and Biz and all these guys, there is now a new congressional district in Alabama, a black opportunity district, as we say. And our friend Shamari is running for that district.
So exciting.
So exciting.
Shout out
and
Shamari.
to be, and Kalisha, his wife, to be in to be in Mobile, Alabama, and to be, I mean, we went everywhere. We were in churches, we were in black coffee shops, we were in union halls, and people are so fired up. I'm not going to curse because Carrie's dad.
We've been so strongly reprimanded. Like, if I could be grounded still, if it was possible to take away privileges from me at the big age of 38.
It's true. But that was special because I think that there's been so much focus on Trump, Kamala, and to be in an environment where neither of those people really came up.
Sure.
Was really important I think, for me. I needed that for my soul. But where do we go from here, Twig?
Well, I think you're bringing up an important point, which is that we have not talked much about what's happening in the States.
Sure.
In this election cycle so far, and we're going to correct that with an upcoming episode of someone I'm really excited to have on the pod.
You should say who it is. Or do we want to tease it?
Are we? I think we're teasing it, as they call it.
We have a very, very big special guest.
It's like really dignified. It's
very
ridiculous.
Excited. Very exciting special guest. And this special guest reached out to us, specifically Carrie, not to me, specifically to Carrie, to come on the podcast, which is so
cool. It was
cool.
Wild. I immediately screenshotted it and sent it to my mom and my sister, and was just like, "Guys, what?
We made it.
We made it." But, there's the idea that we could have the presidency, the House, the Senate, that we could do things instantaneously or instantly codify Roe are really spectacular and exciting. And it is hard. I mean, one of the reasons why I decided to go to Pennsylvania was so that I wouldn't be up till 2 a.m. doom scrolling in LA and sort of just feeling really out of touch with whatever was happening on the ground. I can't say I'm actually more in touch because now I'm at like the center of the
You're in the eye of the tornado.
Totally. Yeah. And it is really hard to get a sense of what's actually happening. But I will say, the campaign, given that she had 100 days to really make this campaign in her own image and to stand up a much different campaign than what Joe Biden would have needed.
Yeah.
I've been so impressed by everyone in Pennsylvania and everyone's working as hard as they possibly can, doing the best that they possibly can in a really difficult set of circumstances. But I think it's a real testament to the strength of her candidacy that we are in striking distance in basically every battleground state in the country.
True. The House and the Senate are up for grabs. And regardless of how this comes down, those potential wins become even more important. Yes, to perhaps codify Roe, but even more importantly, to keep a potential Donald Trump presidency in check, which we know is already fucking, excuse my language, Jesus, already off the hinges. But for those folks who, we talked a little bit about this with Jenna, and apologies, we couldn't get the video situation working in Philly. So we have our first audio pod since I think our very first podcast that's up on Spotify. We went deep on Philly, but for those folks who want to get a little bit of a flavor of like how people are feeling, that's what people keep texting me. Like, are we going to win? How are we feeling? How are people feeling in Philly? Like, are people feeling confident about our chances there?
I would say, honestly, this past week, maybe the end of last week, over the weekend, and the last couple days, it has shifted. I think there was a lot of anxiety and stress. I think there was a plan in place that was being implemented, and yet I think there was a clear-eyed sense of how much was yet to be done. Now that we're sort of in GOTV mode, we're prepping for it, and the machine that we've built is starting to run a little bit more smoothly. It feels as though the sentiment is a little bit higher. I think the Trump campaign has not helped themselves. I think without a doubt they have won so much of the sort of culture war and kind of cultural zeitgeist of the campaign. She has been an extraordinary infusion, winning news cycle after news cycle in that sort of day-to-day press way over the course of the last several weeks with like her kind of full frontal, I shouldn't say that, but like full force kind of PR blitz around from Call Her Daddy on to
She
sort of
just
the
stepped
CNN
into it in a way that you and I were begging for her to do.
Totally.
And like
nailed it.
and also every podcast, by the way, that we mentioned that she should go on, she went on.
Yeah.
Even the ones we didn't think she would go on.
Club Shay Shay. Club Shay Shay.
She still did it.
Reputation.
She still did it.
With the exception of Rogan, which I want to get to Trump's appearance on Rogan.
Yes.
But so between the headwinds that kind of attention creates for people on the ground, and then I think enough of the structure being built to then operationalize the GOTV process on the ground, it's really shifted sentiment. People feel a lot better. I'm speaking sort of in generalizations. There's always kinks. Campaigns are an imperfect process. And then the Trump campaign is not helping itself, right? The crazy MSG rally, the fact that they have outsourced so much of their field operation to people who don't seem to know what they're doing or have as much of a presence in places like Pennsylvania, the huge number of validators who are coming out from whether it's generals or Bernie or whoever coming out and kind of being on the front lines.
Bad Bunny. Fuck
Bad
the generals.
Bunny.
Bad Bunny. Let's go.
Bad Bunny, let's go.
God damn.
Ariana Grande, everybody kind of coming out. J-Lo. It's been really, there's been a sentiment shift on the ground that I can sense, which is really great. And then I've also gotten to be out in the field a handful of days. I've gone and knocked on doors. I've staffed people as they went to GOTV events and like getting out of the office, like I'm losing my voice, but getting out of the office is such a balm.
Yes.
So like
feeling
so head down in the numbers and you're constantly solving problems, which means you're looking at all the things that aren't working.
Yes.
But then you get to leave the office and you're looking at all the things that are working, and that helps a lot.
You're right. It's like, balm is the right word for it, because I think when you do actually have real conversations with real voters, now it can go the other way too.
Yeah.
I'll be honest. Like it could go the other way as well, where it makes you that much more scared about our prospects. But I mean, where do we start with? I think before we had Tom on, I would always go through the Real Clear Politics average of the polls. We promised Tom that we weren't going to do that.
I saw Tom last night. I was walking down the street and
bless.
I ran into Tom at a crosswalk. Just like gave him a big
because
hug.
he was there. I saw he was at the rally. But here's what I will say, just for consistency's sake, because we're 6 days out, right? And I think when we started this podcast, we were Zooming and we were looking at those Real Clear polls for Biden. Let's remember when we first started doing this. And I think it was a helpful moment when we agreed with Tom that we're just going to stop looking at the polls, because for those people who are looking at the polls, the Real Clear Politics average does not look good for us, right? Like we are down in every single battleground state on the average of the polls, which if you were to look at a trend line of the battleground states, Kamala's at the lowest that she's ever been. Even, again, when she took the helm, she had not been polled, right? And so a lot of the sort of surge of her polling when she took over was pre her against Trump. It was more just her likability or favorability as vice president. And so what I'm hoping, what you're describing, which is this sort of, I think you're right, this shift within maybe the past 2 weeks, right? We know a lot of these polls are out in the field. There's probably there's a lag. There's like a 1.5 to 2 week lag. I'm hoping that we're closing, right? Like this is a moment, if we're going to close strong, you're not going to see these, like you're actually probably not even going to see a poll that reflects where the American people are actually at.
Yeah.
We're 6 days out.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think a couple things that are worth mentioning in that are, one, the Trump team and the right in general has been really sophisticated about how they manipulate news cycles.
Yes.
And there's been a bunch of articles that have come out recently about how they are getting as many sort of Trump favoring polls or right favoring polls into these overall averages so that there's more stories that he's winning.
100%.
So that they're trying to depress Democrats and make them feel as though there's no chance, right? And so there is a little bit of that happening.
There's a lot of that happening.
Think a lot. Okay.
I think there's a lot of that happening. To be fair, also, and not to cut you off, but I'll forget, is Poly Market, which we've not really discussed at all because I think it's pure bullshit. But Poly Market, which is this sort of betting markets for the elections, which is owned by Peter Thiel, funded by. If you go on Twitter over the course of the past 72 hours, the first thing that you see is the Poly Market poll.
Right.
That Poly Market poll is completely manipulated by money. And what you see when you go to Twitter is Trump up 30 points in the Poly Market. That is strategic.
Yeah. 100%.
That is strategic in so many different ways. One, to increase enthusiasm for Donald Trump. But two, which we know is going to happen, regardless of what happens, Trump is going to say that he won. And
No
so
matter
when
what.
you
Yeah.
create this narrative that he's up 30 points,
How could he possibly lose?
How could
my
he
God.
lose?
It's so nefarious.
how could he possibly lose?
Yeah.
So you just can't take any of that Poly Market shit. Like anytime you see that, just throw it out.
Yeah.
Just completely throw it out. But you're right about you're 100% right about the average of the averages, which is there's a lot of shitty polls in there.
Right. And then the other thing I would point out is because a lot of people are pointing to early vote data, and we got to get Tom back on.
Yep.
Maybe on Friday or something.
Yeah.
But I have done a little bit of actually listening to Donald Trump. Not much.
No.
I know.
Look at you.
I know. and so I can't remember what exactly got me sucked in, if it was a video or an article. I'm sure I read it. I can't stand to watch. But about how they're pushing so hard for early voting.
They are.
Early vote in person. And
Yeah.
so there's been, which has then generated its own wave of stories about all the enthusiasm, all the votes that are coming in. I think one of the articles that you sent me about the expert from Nevada
Yep.
was like, this looks terrible if you're a Democrat. But
Ralston.
right. Because he is pushing such a he's pushing for his supporters to vote in person and early in a way that they haven't before.
Well, they've also created a challenge because so many of their voters are skeptical of mail-in ballots.
Right.
So all of these in-person early vote locations, they're pushing like gangbusters.
Right.
So anyway, sorry to interrupt.
No. So I think that's really interesting, and
Yeah.
that's feeding into this dynamic, or especially over the course of the top of last week, of just like, oh, we're in so much trouble because look at how many Republicans are turning out. But, that'll be really interesting to see how our voters can. I mean, it's going to be a challenge. Like, there's so many little things in Pennsylvania. They're like, if you don't sign your ballot, if you don't date your ballot, it can get rejected.
Yeah.
If your ballot is not in the yellow envelope, which goes into the big white envelope, it gets rejected.
Yep.
If you're like, there's so many, they've made it so tiki schmeeky and like so precise that there's so many ways that your ballot can get invalidated or sent back to you, and then you have to go through a secondary process, which means the campaign is spending a lot of resources tracking whose ballots are getting rejected. We're seeing numbers that older Black women are getting rejected at 2 times the rate of your average white voter. Older Latina women are getting rejected at 3 and 4 times the rate. I mean, it's very complex the way that they have made these ballots, which is a tactic to suppress and refine who gets to vote. And we're going to see that over and over again. Yeah.
So taking a step back, so we're listening to Tom. We're not going to, although I did just say it. So anyway, I'm bedwetting. The polls don't look good, but we're not going to focus on the polls. What Tom did tell us to focus on were data points. And I think, the one you're right where I was going to segue, which is, the states where their early voting is almost for Democrats has been our way of winning, right? I mean, it's Nevada, which is one of the earliest early vote states. I mean, there was early vote in Nevada in 2008. We were organizing for Obama in 2008, the early vote. I mean, there's early vote centers at supermarkets. There's early vote centers literally on the Las Vegas Strip. Like you can go early vote in casinos, right? So this is not new for Democrats. This is new for Republicans. And so what you're seeing is, in my humble opinion, and again, I don't want this whole podcast to be us up here just talking about how Kamala Harris might lose. But John Ralston, which is kind of the oracle of Nevada, is pretty stunned at how many Republicans have voted in Nevada. Because to your point, that takes a certain level of organizing. It takes a certain level of communication, right? To have that big of a culture shift for a voting demographic that doesn't typically early vote, and for them to be essentially breaking records for Republicans voting early.
That's such an interesting point around how quickly they can change the behavior of their voters. I think one of the things that, no matter who wins, I think she will win, to be clear, but no matter who wins, we need to talk a lot more about how to be much more engaged with culture on the left. It is they've done such a good job, to your point, around how they disseminate this information, how they all get on the same page. And we'll talk about the Rogan thing, but it's they have these platforms and these venues where they're reaching tens of millions of people at one time who are then happy to follow the instructions, right? Yes. And so you go from 2020, where the right was like, we're voting on election day because we don't mind crowds because COVID is fake and we shouldn't be avoiding crowds, or whatever they were saying about COVID, to Democrats are trying to steal this, so we have to vote early and in person. That's how we're going to stop the steal.
Yes.
And that's such a incredible shift in behavior in a relatively short period of time that they are very comfortable steering. And I don't think Democrats are very comfortable trying to steer people's behavior in that way. Mm-hmm. We're much more just like, here are your options and you know best which one to choose for you. And I think maybe getting a little bit more engaged and this is the option. There are multiple options, and there's one that is the best possible outcome and option for X, Y, and Z to happen. For us to win.
Exactly.
For the issue you care about to be advanced.
Right.
Do this.
Yeah.
We got to stop being so shy about that. And I think that they're so smart to do it through culture, to do it through Rogan, to do it through the ways that they do. And we need to catch up.
Well, it calls into question, oh my God, John Carson's going to want to throttle me for even bringing this up. But I'm going to do it because this has always been brought up. By the way, this is not
people who John Carson is.
John Carson was my boss at the White House, also my boss in the Obama campaign in 2008. He was a national field director, still to this day, the greatest boss I've ever had. I mean, just the smartest, most earnest country boy that you'll ever meet, farm boy you'll ever meet. And what I said, Carson will hate this because I do think that, Trump doesn't have field. Trump doesn't have field offices. Trump doesn't have an army of unpaid volunteers out there knocking on doors and doing persuasion and doing voter ID. He's just not doing any of that. Donald Trump is going on Joe Rogan and 40 million people are watching. 40 million people have watched him on Joe Rogan just rant and rave for 3 hours. And so there has been a lot of that kind of get out the vote operation has been filled by super PACs and filled by money.
Yeah.
Like Elon Musk and some of these other sort of more traditional billionaire class that are just pouring money into get out the vote. Elon Musk is also trying to literally bribe people to vote, which is a whole, I'm not sure if you've seen this.
I did.
It's giving out $100 for people to vote. But all this to say, one of the things that I've been hearing about this campaign apparatus is sort of comparing the Kamala campaign apparatus to the Obama campaign apparatus, which you just can't do. It's just completely unfair. If you compare it by number of field offices, if you compare it by number of voter contacts, we are just living in a completely different era and a completely different generation. And also Obama had 2 years to build that field structure during the primary into the general election. Kamala's had what?
100 days?
3 months?
Yeah.
3 months to build a field team. Of course, she's laying on top of Biden's team, but
which wasn't that robust.
Yeah.
I mean, which might feel controversial, but it does not seem clear to me that when Joe Biden was at the top of the ticket, that there was meaningful infrastructure being built in battleground states. From everything that I hear, and it is anecdotal, and from everything I've seen, there has been a lot of building that had to get done once she became the top of the ticket. And I'll give credit to the fact that, or I'll at least give acknowledgement to the fact that there was almost no field organization in 2020. There weren't like people knocking on doors.
We're operating in COVID.
It was
right?
a COVID era.
This was a COVID election. There was none of that. In
2016, there was a field operation, but it did very little persuasion. Like, it was really heavily focused on kind of last minute GOTV, because the expectation was that Trump was an absolute non-starter and that there would be this Hillary landslide. And we didn't have to convince people to vote for Hillary Clinton. So it's really been since 2012 that there was a meaningful, robust field operation anyway. And what that means is our volunteer lists aren't up to scratch. We have an entire generation of field organizers who have not had meaningful experience, who have not gone through a hardcore primary process, who have not had to organize turf after turf and grow and expand and go from like a precinct to a county, not had the opportunity to go, build towards a region, to the DFD, to a state level. So there's a talent gap. There's an experience gap, probably not a talent gap. There's an experience gap amongst field organizers in the Democratic kind of infrastructure. And I think it's showing.
It is showing.
And it's something that we're going to have to very seriously address and think about. There's also been like, I don't know if you know this, but FOs, field organizers on the campaign are unionized.
Oh, get out of here.
So that never used to be the case. So
it's
now,
not the case.
So that is still something we're trying to figure out, how to integrate an organized labor force into what has traditionally been a highly exploitative
Are you kidding me?
work environment.
FOs, I couldn't believe they gave me, I didn't get paid at all during the primary, but they gave me a business card. And I still remember it was like, but it wasn't even like a real Obama business card. It was like almost like made from, it was union made, but California made business cards for their, they called them RFOs because we didn't have money to get RFDs. So they're RFOs.
Amazing.
And it was the greatest thing in my entire life.
Sure.
Like greater than any paycheck I could ever receive.
Sure. Young and hungry. And so, but that has added a real layer of complexity. Like I have conversations with people and we're just like, wait a second. So you're done at 8? Okay.
Oh, wow.
And okay. What? Okay. We want you to have these things. We want you to have a better environment than we grew up in. And for that to be the kind of first era that we're doing this on a presidential, and it happens to be this one where we have 100 days and we're so far behind anyway, has been really interesting.
Wow. That's good. That will be a very interesting November 6th article.
Yeah, right. And it's like young people should not go into debt to work for the candidate that they choose. They should not go into debt they should not work themselves. Like I'm all for it. And there are so many new things and stresses that are happening that are putting a lot of pressure on a system that hasn't been tested really since 2012 anyway.
It also makes sense too, because I think that the generational divide, if you will, among Gen Z and now Gen Alpha as well, which is like them essentially saying, I don't care if that's the way it was.
Totally.
If that was the way you did it, great.
Yeah.
You and I did it where we, stayed up till midnight, 2 a.m., 3 a.m., didn't really get paid, slept on people's couches, super exploited.
Yeah.
But
I did it happily. Yeah.
But we did it happily, and it wasn't really about the paycheck, right?
Yeah.
That moment, which is very hard to compare that Obama moment to this moment. But a lot of people are doing it right now, at least friends of mine, because they have, like you, entered the campaign apparatus, former Obama people, and they're kind of left wondering, this doesn't feel the same. Right.
But it hasn't had the chance
It doesn't have to. It doesn't have to feel the same.
Yeah. And it doesn't have to. It hasn't had the chance to.
Yeah.
She didn't, you have to remember, and I don't want this episode to turn into like the Barack Obama old people remembering
It's too late.
the old days.
Too late.
But, you know, like, it was so unlikely until Iowa. Like, so you just had this.
Great point.
We were the believers. Like, we were the people who believed that it could happen, who had this vision with this guy. And it was, like, I remember my whole family, Black people who were really excited for a Black president, but we're just like, baby, like, don't get your hopes up. There's just no chance. And like me pushing back and fighting to be like, yes, you don't understand. You don't understand. You don't understand. Like, it's going to happen. It's going to happen. And that, like, she hasn't had that opportunity. It just feels really different. And I was thinking actually last night watching her speech, and I was the friends that I was there with, I was sort of, they were like, Carri, try and enjoy it, because I was like, very obviously, like, my work brain was on, and I was thinking about the difference between how it felt to watch her and how it felt to watch him, and how wild it all felt. Like, it all just felt so unbelievable. Like, you were watching the impossible happen, and having that experience makes watching her feel so totally possible. Like, it just doesn't have that, like,
it felt like a movie.
It felt like a movie.
Like, when Obama was running, it felt fake. It felt like there's no way this guy can become president. You know what I mean? Like, this has to be something Aaron Sorkin drew up. Like, there's no way that America is going to elect this really amazing, brilliant, good dude.
Yeah.
You know, like, it just seemed like that. Like, how could we live in a country where that could happen?
And we did. And then she, because of that, though, I think the improbability of her has shrunk.
Yes.
So dramatically.
Agreed.
Right. So she doesn't have that, like, soaring newness, because Barack Obama gave us this familiar archetype to sort of work and draft off of. And then I also think that because she's a woman, she has to be a lot more practical, right? We let Barack Obama woo us with poetry and rhetoric and vision. And it reminds me of, I was watching her last night, and I was reminded of this really classic saying. I think it comes out of like comes out of the corporate world and the VC world, which is, we invest in men's potential and we invest in women's experience. So we're willing to take a chance on men's potential, but women have to prove that they can do it before we allow them to do it, or before we invest in them to do it. And it's just like this fundamental way that sexism shows up in how we treat men and women in spaces. And I was thinking that about her last night, listening to her speech, and 75,000 people is unbelievable, but it just had this, it was so much more down to earth.
Yes.
Than Barack Obama ever was. It was so much more practical. And I think it's the right call. She has to be. But it was just a fascinating contrast.
Different. No, I mean, even than what they named it, right? Was it the final argument or the final proposal? What did they call the speech?
No.
I think they called it the final argument, or, you know, like, I think, no, there is no soaring, lofty, hopeful rhetoric. I mean, that speech was brass tacks.
Yeah.
Here's what we're going to do. Here specifically, here's what we're going to do. Well, okay. So let's start with, should we talk through the Rogan of it all? I mean, there's so many things that we could tackle that we've not had a chance to discuss. I think the thing that I am telling all of my friends and loved ones to be careful for is not to fall for this trap that, as chaotic as that MSG rally was, that this is going to be some pivotal moment in the campaign because of, you know.
Interesting. Talk me through that.
Yeah, well, because you have a roast comedian get up there and he says really ridiculous, stupid things, racist things. And somehow that is going to fundamentally shift the nature of this election. I think that we forget a couple of things. One, we keep talking about who is Trump truly playing for. He's playing for Gen Z men, period. If we just look at the data set, the room for growth among Gen Z men, and I don't mean just Gen Z white men, I just mean Gen Z men broadly speaking, it's very high, right? I think for the last cycle, it was like 50-40, right? So having Kill Tony on MSG, who's probably the most popular, I mean, outside of
Rogan.
like folks like Rogan, literally,
Yeah.
and outside of folks like Shane Gillis and some of these other guys, like he's a very popular comedian among this demographic for this reason.
Sure.
He's a shock comedian,
Sure.
right? And so again, I love Bad Bunny. I love how the community came together to condemn a very bad joke. I'm not trying to say that what this guy said was funny or good in any shape or form, but this is also what Trump says every day.
Sure.
I mean, this is no different than any of the other speakers who got up there to speak said some version of this. It just wasn't a badly worded joke. From conversations from Springfield, Ohio, to Stephen Miller saying Americans are for Americans only, like none of this stuff is out of bounds. And so this kind of like tone policing falls right into the hands of the central argument for young men to begin with, right? It's not, it doesn't, in my opinion, it doesn't shift the trajectory of what we're doing here, which is Trump is going after young men. Having Kill Tony was a strategic decision that, in fact, Joe Rogan himself suggested he do.
Sure.
Like he told Trump, you got to get more comedians. You got to have more comedians on. He's like, I've seen your rallies, right? You need more humor in your rallies. You need comedians in your rallies, right? So I think, again, just hold our horses here, and the left and Twitter is not real life. It's just not real life.
I'm going to push back on a couple different things.
Okay, go for it.
Because here's the thing. Gen Z men are not enough to win you the presidency, right? And we know that...
In these battleground states, though, they could be.
But we know that... But the other people in those battleground states, like in Pennsylvania, there's 700,000 Puerto Ricans.
True.
Right? One of the first things when I saw that, I was like, we need to find somebody who already voted for Trump and who regrets it, having seen that.
Oh, true.
And cut an ad with them immediately. And then I think
Great
Jake
idea.
Tapper had a segment doing that. You're welcome. And but the campaign needs to be all over that. I was
agree with
like,
that.
what are you, get out there, right? So I think that there's a very real chance that it offends enough Puerto Ricans and people who either were going to stay at home or were thinking about voting for him in a way that is galvanizing enough between multiple different states to turn the tide. I think that, obviously because of Israel and Gaza and the ongoing war, she is not performing as well. The Democrats are not performing as well as they could with either Jews
True.
or Palestinians or Arab community or Arabs in general,
True.
right? Neither group likes Nazis. And so the echoes of the fascism and the Nazism is terrible, and I think potentially galvanizes those two populations, either who are thinking about staying at home or potentially voting for Donald Trump. Right. And you think about, Black people, the watermelon joke was just not funny. Here's the thing. Let me finish this train of thought. And we already know that some of the concern, particularly around Black men, has gotten a little blown out of proportion. Like, Black men are still going to vote for Kamala at huge rates.
Agreed.
I think it gives a little bit more of an incentive, and we're seeing more and more Black leaders and cultural figures step out, like Offset and Quavo, and people who wouldn't influence us necessarily, but might influence people who are thinking about just not participating or whatever. So I think we're seeing far more engagement happen there. It's just breaking late, and these types of things don't help, and that can make a big difference in Georgia. It can make a big difference in North Carolina. So I think that we're in a game of inches at this point.
True.
Like it's such slim margins on
Good
this
point.
electoral math that it's not like there's going to be some massive swing in the popular vote, but I think that could be enough to win either some House seats to change the way that it shows up in battleground states.
I hope so. Here's my thing though, not to be the Debbie Downer here about this, because I do think it's good that a bad comedian's bad jokes is galvanized, Bad Bunny and J-Lo and John Leguizamo, all these incredible figures and left Twitter. That's great. I mean, like Kill Tony's Google searches skyrocketed, right? People were like, who is this idiot, right? And this fundamentally goes down to like how we as a country and as a media cover Donald Trump.
Interesting.
Because this guy, Trump says this every day.
Yeah, totally.
He says this
but you're
every
right. We're numb to
single day. Every day. Like last night in his rally, there were long stretches of him talking about immigrants from Venezuela. There are all these criminals. Kamala's going to bring all these criminals from Venezuela. I mean, like, this rhetoric it's on the daily. You know what I mean?
Sure.
And it's not, unfortunately, it's not a bad joke in Madison Square Garden.
But it did break through.
It did break through. Good point.
What has to happen is we have to go and this goes back to the conversation around culture is Democrats have to do a better job. And this is happening, but we need to do more of it, of taking moments that actually do break through organically and then adding wind to the sails and throwing gas on the fire, right? Like instead of passively assuming that people are going to find this content and interpret it the way that we want them to, we have to bracket it, amplify it, and just turn it out across platform in a way that we haven't done especially good job of. And I think you said something earlier that I want us to talk about, which I think is super interesting, which is just the way that we police tone. Because I find comedy based on identity really funny.
Same.
Like I think there's a lot to make fun of about the way that we treat race. I think there's a lot to make fun of about the way that like we are attached to it, the way that we're precious of it, the way that we're protective of it, how arbitrary it all is. Same with gender, same with, I think identity-based humor is really, really funny to me. It is of a different variety. Even when it's irreverent, even when it's like a little off color, the juicier the better. Like, I think that's great. And I don't think that we admit that about ourselves enough. Like, you think about, like, I don't know if you remember this. Do you remember, like, jokes there were? We were constantly telling racial jokes in the White House.
All of the time. And that's my part, right? I mean, again, I work for a comedy company for many years. And so I have a natural inclination of defending comedians. I just do.
Yeah.
And it's not a surprise that Jon Stewart defended Tony. I'm not sure if you guys saw this clip. Like, this is a shock comedian. This is literally what he does. He's a roast comedian. Now, were any of those jokes funny? No.
That's the problem.
Yeah.
They weren't funny.
So they weren't funny
or insightful or
interesting.
Yeah.
And he bombed terribly. And you're right. And hopefully we will reap the benefits of that in turning out our side, but I don't know. There is also something that in sort of Jon Stewart kind of touched on a little bit too, which is, that, and how do I put this without sounding like I support fucking support this guy? Well, like it's the notion that a insult comic can make some really ridiculous jokes is what makes, that is his prerogative.
Sure.
I don't think that his intent was Nazism. I don't think his intent was to be this malicious, racist person. This is literally his calling card. Yeah, this is his calling card. But anyway,
I get it. But I think the thing that people are actually upset about and pushing back against is Kill Tony's had a career. He's doing his thing. He was at the Tom Brady roast. The Tom Brady roast is an appropriate forum for
Absolutely.
him. A presidential rally is not.
Great point.
And I think that,
but it has become though. But
it has become, and I think that is what people are pushing back against.
100%.
It's like do your dirty over here though. Like we have to kind of keep some of this separate, ideally. Well, like, not that there can't be jokes. There had to be comedians that he could have had that could have threaded the needle better around the irreverence and the anti-woke thing that they're attempting to pursue without pissing off a base of voters that they 100% need in order to win. Like, I think that there's a big space that could have been occupied between what happened and what they might have been going for.
Yeah.
And I think part of that is, I think if he had done it well, we would have been screwed. I think if Kill Tony had done a set that seemed insightful, that seemed like cracking jokes about Puerto Ricans or Black people, whoever, as someone who had any sort of affection or familiarity with them, like, it could have really amplified their position of like, guys, see, like, they're trying to get you all pissed off and worked up about jokes, and look at you, they're funny. Like, we're all in this together. You can make fun of all of us.
No, that's a great point. No, you're saying, it's interesting. It's almost like, you know, it's typically comedy is used as a way. It's like the flip, right? Where when I was at Funny or Die, like, we were always trying to use comedy as like a Trojan horse, right?
100%.
We're always going to try to use comedy to reach people who just don't give a shit about politics or who don't care about policy, or, you know, they're doing their own thing, and this is the way we're going to bring them in. Weirdly, they fucked up so bad that they poorly executed comedy, literally shined a spotlight on how fascist, racist, ridiculous this entire Trump MAGA wannabe authoritarian state is.
Yeah.
Right? Because just having Stephen Miller out there doing his best whatever, I don't even know, I don't even want to use the right word, like doing his best whatever is not enough, because one, he's boring as shit. Two, he sucks and he's a cuck. And go fuck yourself, Stephen Miller, right? Like, but you need Tony to bomb for people to be like, oh, this is bad news, you know? So, anyway, so thank you, Tony, for bombing. We appreciate you.
Thanks so much. Because I think you're right. We've become so inured to whatever Donald Trump is doing. But I will say it's amazing if you can, be a television star. Yeah. Because you can ride that for decades. It is no matter what this dude says, people are like, but he's a businessman. But like, people just remember the character he played on The Apprentice. Yes. And sort of in popular culture and in Home Alone and all of this. And they're like, that's the guy. Yes. And on Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous with Robin Leach. And like, people are just like, no, I mean, that guy's great. Like, he's so cool. He's so fun and rich. But
he's also, the last thing I'll say, and this goes to like how media, fundamentally, Trump broke media. Yeah. Trump broke, we look at the Washington Post non-endorsement. We look at the LA Times non-endorsement. Oh my God, that was wild. We look at the way. I
unsubscribed, by the way.
We all did. I mean, 250,000 people unsubscribed. But the challenge with that, though, my friend Helena Andrews-Dyer is a journalist at the Post. This will affect actual journalists at the Post. This will not affect Jeff Bezos. This will create more opportunities for the Post to lay off more reporters. So we feel really good about unsubscribing, but simultaneously it means really great journalists are going to lose their jobs. So great. We did real great here.
So should I resubscribe?
No, I don't know. I mean, I still think
I hope someone else buys it.
I hope someone else buys it, but the thing about media right now is, you know, Trump, people like Trump, like my parents, because he is dumb.
I know.
By the way, I think that people, I don't know that my parents would agree with the way I put that, but meaning that like they like him because he makes mistakes.
Yeah, I know.
Because he you know,
He feels approachable.
yeah, because he feels like everyone else. He feels like them, right? And I think that when we cover his mistakes, or we cover him, you know, what is the term that we're using now, where he just like goes on rants? I can't even remember.
His term is the weave.
The weave. Yes, the weave. When he goes on the weave, his supporters they give him the benefit of the doubt. You know, we don't do that on our side. It's like Kamala misspeaks twice, and she's a word salad artist. You know what I mean? Like, it's unbelievable how we hold our elected officials to such a high standard.
I know.
I don't understand it, to be honest.
But we got to get back to it. We should.
We should. Twigg is like, that's the way it should be.
It is. These are hard jobs.
I know.
So,
I know.
like, you have kids. Would you prefer to watch children's sports or professional sports? Like, why is it in this one industry we don't value professionalism, and we don't value expertise, and we don't value experience? It is wild to me how we have allowed a culture to be built up around elected officials where I was listening to this interview with John Fetterman. He's like, I'm not a politician. Like, we've turned expertise into a liability and something that is detrimental. Imagine if your doctor was like, I'm not a doctor. I'm going to do this surgery, but I'm not a doctor. Like, I've never been a career medicine man.
Because I don't think that that's why people vote for people anymore. I think people vote for people strictly on personality, strictly on how they make them feel about themselves.
But we got to get back to competency.
I know.
Because the thing is, you're going to continue to be upset with the outcome of your government if you continue to elect people who don't know how to operate a government.
Yeah.
Like, it's a real mind bender.
Yeah. Well, I think, yes. I think, and as it relates to this final week, actually, I'm gonna like quickly, you're right, because the one beautiful thing about being in Alabama and hearing Shamari was his speech was so specific.
Yeah. It
was, we need to fix this water plant in this county. We need to get this specific school more funding. We need to fix this and it was like gospel. And we were in a church, and every line, everyone was like, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, we need the water plant fix. We need that school back up and running. We need this. And I don't think for Trump, we need to demonize immigrants. We need to close the border, right? We need to reduce crime, and we need to get jobs going. And I think for Democrats and for Kamala Harris, even in the closing argument, do you feel like people know transactionally what they're voting for other than abortion rights? Like that will make their lives better.
No, not. I mean, I think we've said this before. It's a real vibes election.
Yeah.
It feels like a real vibes driven election more so than a policy driven election. I think that it's become so broad.
Yes.
It's like we know that Trump will roll back all manner of environmental protections. Like, Trump's bad on the environment, Kamala good on the environment.
By the way, that was the part of the Rogan interview where they went back and forth on.
Interesting.
Yeah, Rogan was pushing back on, it was like 2 hours into the conversation, or 1.5 hours into the conversation. But Trump was like listing all the things he was going to do. And Rogan was like, well, why is reducing environmental regulations good for the country? Which was interesting. And then Trump kind of weaved and got out of it.
Said God knows what. I think the one place where we are demanding specificity, at least from the left, I can't speak to the right, but is around Israel and Palestine.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that there's been a major push for very specific policies to be put in place.
It's the thing that comes up. People, speaking of media and how we don't know how to cover this election.
Yeah.
Almost every conversation that I have with like real people, from my conversations with, I've been in the San Quentin Film Festival, was with residents there. Then I had to go to the Sing Sing Film Festival. then I was in Alabama, then I was like literally my Uber driver. Like every single person has brought up Gaza.
Yeah.
Almost every single real person in my life has brought up Gaza. It is not brought up one time if you watch cable news.
Yeah.
Not one single time is it brought up.
Yeah.
It's not brought up in any context with these polls. It's a striking, glaring omission that I am most concerned about for our side.
Yeah.
And
well, there's a relativism that I think makes it really hard. I mean, you know, you look at what's happening in Sudan right now. I mean, 40 million people are being displaced in Sudan. Famine, tens and tens of 100,000 children.
Yes.
Like the scale of what is happening there. And it's if you read the newspaper at all, it's buried. I mean, people have no concept of it.
People don't
right?
read the
What happened in the number of children that died and were starved to death in Yemen 2 years ago, 3 years ago. And I think that journalists and I think so many policymakers, so many journalists who are used to thinking comprehensively are really struggle with the way that the public's attention will latch onto one thing, the arbitrary way that the public's attention will latch onto one thing, but not another.
Yes.
And struggle to figure out how to react to that. And I think that that's their job. They need to figure it out. But I personally struggle with that too.
Yes.
I'm just like, but why this and not that?
Yes.
I don't understand. And it makes me resistant to like the call for urgency. I'm like, but literally look 1,000 miles south.
Yes.
Can we at least mention both?
Yes.
You know, and it's really, I have a lot of, it's really hard, and you see why it doesn't show up.
Yeah, and I also will put this a little bit onto the Kamala campaign as well. I think that this is an issue that they've just there's no other way to put it, have just ignored. Yeah. And I think by ignoring the issue, you're ignoring a very large voter demographic that, you know, we sort of count on to vote for Democrats.
Yeah.
And I very much worry about that. I worry in these closing days that, to your point, I mean, maybe this racism maybe lights a fire underneath this demographic to realize, this is actually what fascism looks like. Yeah. This Madison Square Garden rally, this is what this looks like.
I don't even know that it's that grandiose.
Yeah.
I think that he did such a good job. What's this guy's name? Kill Tony?
I call him Kill. It's Tony Hinclough.
Okay.
I just call him Kill Tony. It's a show.
He did such almost everybody aside from White Dude's Got a Piece in that set, you know? And so I don't think it even ladders up for so many people to something as grandiose as fascism, aside from maybe Jewish folks. But, you know, I think that it's just like, don't shit on my country. Like, what is your problem? Yeah. Like, you don't know us. We're not a part. Like, you've demonstrated no understanding of us as a people, of our culture, of the extraordinary place that Puerto Rico is.
Also, Puerto Rico is beautiful.
Puerto Rico
it's also just a bad joke. I just went to Puerto Rico a couple of years ago. It is like paradise.
No, that's the whole thing. It's like you didn't like jokes about race that even might be racist work if you know what you're talking about. Yeah. And like you will get laughs. Right. If people are like, no, it's going a little bit drown. Right. And or there's some affection, there's knowledge, there's insight there. Right. And he demonstrated none of that. Maybe he does have it, but he demonstrated none of it. And in that particular joke. And so I think that's why it doesn't work. While we really talk about we've covered a lot of ground, but it goes back to us saying that it was a strategic mistake not to have somebody represent either the uncommitted delegates at the convention or like a Palestinian given an opportunity to speak on the floor of the convention. That,
and also just having, again, there is right now that war is escalating. It's you know,
spreading.
It's spreading. And I think that it's almost incumbent on the administration. And again, there's 5 days left, so why are we talking about this? But post-election,
it's our pod. We
can
talk about
we can talk about what we want. But post-election, it has to be addressed, regardless of who's president. And so,
well, homeboy is out here telling Bibi Netanyahu, do what you have to do.
100%.
I mean,
yeah.
Like, it's so unfathomable. And I am really sympathetic to people who feel like they don't have a good choice, you know, in either candidate, who feel as though they are put in between, and while being blamed for her potentially losing.
Yeah.
You know, I'm sympathetic to the fact that it is not protesters, it is not like pro Gaza and pro Palestinian protesters' fault.
Yeah.
If she loses,
people vote. It's your vote. You can do whatever the hell you want to do with your vote. You know? And
we should never blame an electoral loss on young people or anyone protesting.
Yeah.
Like, that is part of the game. And if you can't figure out how to win an election, either in concert with or in spite of the people who oppose you, then you did not win your election.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just, it's not their fault for not agreeing with you. It's no one's fault for not agreeing with you.
Right.
It's your fault for either not convincing them, not giving them a reason to support you, or not finding someone else in equal number and equal measure to support you instead.
I think it's smart for folks like Bernie. Bernie put out a video yesterday, and it was literally aimed at this demographic. The video was
I haven't
like,
seen it yet.
It's good. I mean, it's just like a typical Bernie direct to camera. I'm calling on, it's just like, I can't do a good Bernie. But like, it was literally like, if this is the reason why you don't want to vote, here, I'm going to lay it out to you. These are the options. And, what he did was he incorporated, to your point, if we think things are going to get better under Trump, just look at what he's doing right now and stoking the flames and hugging Bibi vociferously. But also all of the other things, right? I mean, this is the thing about the way that this country works. You can't separate everything. Yeah. You may be a one issue voter, and if you want to use your vote on one issue, Godspeed. But there are very real repercussions to using that vote on one issue.
It is a highly privileged. It's like Michelle Obama said, we will be the collateral damage of your rage,
100%.
And that she was using it in the context of men voting for Trump, despite the very real danger that puts the women in their lives. But I think it applies in this context as well to one issue voters, of just like, we will be the collateral. So many people will be the collateral damage to your rage. And that is,
I thought Michelle's speech was so powerful. I thought that
best of the cycle.
It's been the best. It's the best speech of the cycle. Barack, take some notes, bro. Like, just, he's doing great. I'm kidding. We love Barack. I'm kidding. Of course. I'm just talking about that first interaction.
Fair enough. There was a great tweet that was like Michelle Obama reading her speech and just being like, if this woman doesn't win, I'm going to be asked to run for office every day for the next 4 years. And it's so true.
It's true. But it was almost like a list of like, like, if we lose, this is on you all.
Yeah.
Right. But the one thing I loved about that is, to be on a more hopeful note.
I'm hopeful.
I'm not as hopeful as you. And I've been such a Debbie Downer this pod. I apologize. But it goes back to our conversation with the White Dudes for Harris, which was an inspiring
100%.
conversation. And I think it goes to Kamala closing in a really beautiful way in these final couple of weeks with incredible men. But, we've been kidding. I've been kidding that, like, this campaign will really be decided by, like, white suburban women, right? Like, we're putting the election in the hands of white suburban women. And that is actual bullshit. That is actual straight up hogwash. Like, men, we don't get off. We can't just blame women for this.
Yeah.
We just can't.
Yeah.
If men vote for Trump, it's the idea that reproductive rights and reproductive freedom do not affect men, do not affect our families. It's absolutely absurd.
Yeah.
And there hasn't been enough real organizing. That's why I love what White Dudes for Harris is doing. I love the tone that Michelle is using, where we do have to compete with Trump. We do have to compete with the manosphere. We can't just ignore it.
Yes.
We can't just allow all of these, like, grifters and bullshit artists to win. It's a competition.
Yeah.
And what's happening right now is we're recognizing it, And there are people stepping up, right? Like, I think a lot of the platforms that Kamala is going on with black men has been inspiring, but like we have to keep that going.
Yeah.
You know?
And build that keep continuing to build that infrastructure up off cycle.
Yes.
Like there has to be more off cycle. We keep rushing at the end to do this every 4 years while the Republicans are keeping a meaningful like pace of culture infrastructure building going full time all the time, and maybe never mentioning direct politics, never mentioning legislation, never mentioning Republicans or Democrats, but instilling these kind of political values into the minds of their audience. And the fact that we are not doing that in any meaningful measure is to our detriment, obviously.
We're starting to do it though, right? Like it's almost
we
like
have to keep it up.
We're being forced to, I think, because the manosphere is the culture. Like just if you just think about it in that way, right? If you think about Barstool, Dave Portnoy, Trumper, right? We think about huge Trumper. He interviewed Trump at the White House. We think about WCW and you know, the whole sort of boxing world, Dana White, like Trumper. We think about I mean, I don't even want to get into Rogan. I mean, he is essentially a Trumper, RFK, you know, RFK Jr. adjacent. But it's like we have just allowed male culture to be dominated by all of these white men. Yeah. And what you're finding right now is that black men are stepping up. Yeah, and I think in a really big way. Black athletes, black commentators, black artists. And, you know, something that Obama, speaking of President Obama, something that we worked very hard on with My Brother's Keeper and a lot of other initiatives, but we just need to stay at it. We really do need to stay at it. And the last thing I'll say too is I think Carri and I were at this really great Black Men event in Philly. We saw a lot of old friends. Our friend Quentin helped produce this Black Male Forum at BET, but also like these cable news networks, man, like I just don't know where they get some of these people. Not to be not to be mean.
All right. Oh, right.
Marie and I were watching last night. We're like, who are, I mean, again, I'm speaking mostly of these Republicans that are up there because they have to keep it like fair and balanced. But we just need people who are actually in touch with the culture.
Totally.
You know what I mean? Who have these platforms. If you're going to have 15 people on the panel, include Van Lathan. Include, you know what I mean?
Brilliant.
Like include Shannon Sharp. Include people who actually have a connection to real people. Right. You know? Sorry, I'm on a rant. I'm on a burner here, guys.
I gotta go, man. I gotta catch my train back to Philly.
So we're gonna tease our next guest.
Yes.
And then
our first elected official.
Our first elected official. Are there any last notes? We did not even bring up, when was the last time we brought up your guy, JD Vance?
Ugh.
Is it even worth bringing him up anymore? I know it's a bit in our show, but like that, we were really going to him.
I know. I still want to kick him. I mean, he's been kind of quiet.
Very quiet.
He spoke at Madison Square Garden, but he hasn't had a breakthrough moment in a while.
Did he even speak?
I think he did.
It's incredible.
No, you know I don't watch that nonsense. I don't know. He's out being cuckolded. I don't know what he's doing.
We're gonna. Can we drop? Are we allowed to? I think we should be able to. Like a link where people can volunteer for you in Philly. Like, can people?
Not for me, but you can
not
go.
for you. I mean the campaign. I mean the campaign.
Totally.
Right? Like, because I'm sure there's lots of get out the vote. Canvases, rallies.
KamalaHarris.com.
Oh yeah.
Type in a Pennsylvania address. You know, because it's like I'm sitting in the headquarters most of the time. So you know, we need people out in the field. We need people to volunteer. We need people to go.
So we'll just drop Carri's pin to the headquarters.
Perfect.
You guys can just go.
Perfect. Show up.
Give her a hug. You know what I mean? Bring your Twigg and Jenkins merch. But on behalf of the Jenkins family and the Twigg and Jenkins family, thank you.
Oh.
What Twigg is doing is incredible.
Oh, thanks, honey.
We're doing it. And, you know, maybe the next time we talk, I won't be such a Debbie Downer.
We'll see. I mean, you're sending me a lot of very effusively stressed
I'm just worried.
text messages.
I'm just worried, y'all. Get out and vote.
But I think getting you into a battleground state. You're going to come up to Philly for election day,
Coming
maybe,
up to Philly,
and
yeah.
then I think it makes you feel better to see what's happening on the ground.
Sure.
Like you can't go anywhere in Philly without seeing people knocking on doors, and people are out there. There's buses coming up from DC and down from New York. Like it's really spectacular. So
do it.
yeah, come join. All right, I gotta go. Can't miss this train.
All right. Peace, y'all.
Bye.
Peace.
Thank you.